Welcome to Trial Site News Podcast Series. My name is Adrian, and today we have a guest, Dr. Teresa Quattrin, who is affiliated with the J.R. Oshai Hospital as an attending physician. Dr. Quattrin and University of Buffalo UB, Distinguished Professor of Pediatrics and Senior Associate Dean of Research Integration, spreads the word about clinical trials worldwide in a novel and brilliant way, through a children's storybook. By co-authoring this coloring book, she sought to introduce the world of clinical trials to children and their parents creatively in a way that gets more to open their eyes to the potential of clinical research. The book was supported by UB's Clinical and Translational Science Institute and the International Institute of Buffalo. The book was supported by UB's Clinical and Translational Science Institute. The book is titled Sophia Learns About Research, and Trial Site News has been a proud sponsor of the book on our website. So, Dr. Quattrin, it is an honor and a privilege to have you on the Trial Site News podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Adrian. It's a pleasure to be here and have a chance to share about the Sophia Learns About Research book.
Well, the pleasure is ours, and we're excited to have you talk about it. Now, before we deep dive into the book, can you tell us a little bit about you and how did you get into medicine yourself?
Well, I was very fortunate when I was in medical school in Naples, Italy, that I met some very inspiring individuals in the world of pediatrics. They were my teachers and mentors, and of pediatric endocrinology. And that is really how I started developing a liking for pediatrics and for pediatric endocrinology, and then decided to pursue a formal training in the US after I finished my training in pediatrics. I always knew that I wanted to do something that was meaningful for my patients. And while I've worked in the laboratory, I have always wanted to link everything to how I can help my patients doing better. And this is what my research has been about all these years. Oh, wow. So I was not one person who would grow up with the idea of taking care of kids at all. This came, later and greatly inspired by the world of pediatrics, which I think it's a wonderful world.
Well, that's good to hear. So how about clinical research then? How did you find your way into the profession?
I always wanted to answer questions. So with my mentors, even when I was a medical student, we looked at questions that regards our patients, reported special cases that were a bit unique, and we researched how to treat our patients and do better on their behalf and their families. So I have always wanted to have a clinical practice that was backed up by what nowadays is called evidence-based medicine. And way back then, many years ago, that was not used, and really clinical translational did not exist.
Right.
But that's what I always wanted to do. And so I got into clinical research and clinical research projects every time because there was something that I knew we could be doing better for our patients, whether it was patients who had type 1 diabetes, whether were patients with overweight. And so the clinical research component was always almost an intrinsic part of my clinical practice.
Wow. So then how did you first connect with the idea to use a book then? You mentioned pediatrics earlier, to educate people about clinical trials.
Well, what happened was I became more involved with the clinical translational award that we have at UB, and especially with that section that they call core, called special populations. And special population, by definition from the National Institutes of Health, is a very broad definition that wants to really be inclusive of children, elders, anybody with social disparities, health inequity, rural populations, handicap, and I could name another 10. So as I was an experienced clinical researcher, I thought that if we do want to get more children in clinical trials, what instruments, what tools do we have? How do we teach kids about clinical research? And I was very familiar with brochures, for example, from pharmaceutical trials, but that brochure would be particularly tailored to that particular medicine that we were trying to test. And so I was very fortunate to team up with my colleagues and friends, Renee Cazzo and Alex Marone. Without them, I could have not done the book, and I will explain that in a few minutes why. And sometimes in 2014, we started researching what was available to teach kids about research. And we really didn't find, at that time, we didn't find anything. Nowadays, you will find a game, you will find different ways of, describing clinical research. So there is actually much more now, but when we first started, there wasn't anything. And so we started meeting, Renee and Alex, and I mentioned that I couldn't do it without them because we had different ideas and expertise that complemented each other. And as it is often the case in effective teams, we're actually synergistic. So Dr. Cazzo, Renee Cazzo, is an anthropologist and who does also a lot of work on social determinants of health. And she's also a wonderful mother of 4 children who at the time were 5 through 12 years of age, which was exactly the group we were interested in.
Right.
So we actually picked their heads as well. And Alex Marone, is a millennial. At the time, she was a research assistant in our special population core. And she brought a lot of ideas out of the box. And she's now a 3rd-year medical student. So we tried to build some trust in this book, and we decided that we wanted to be one of these old-fashioned also coloring books, because that would allow experience and the possibility of very young children just scribbling on the book, but then maybe the child grows up and after coloring, maybe liking the activities that are in the book, maybe starting to learn a little bit of the nomenclature. And then as the child grows up a bit more, then the child can really understand maybe more about the meaning and how clinical research and clinical trials are done.
Right, which is really brilliant that you went the coloring book angle. How exactly did you decide on that? Because you obviously the focus on the younger children trying to connect. How did you go from that to, let's do the coloring book? Was it a way to just get them to notice and read more?
It was a way to engage. In our mind, each child is his or her unique individual. And some children learn by going directly to writing. Some children actually go to graphics, are very interested by that. Some kids are interested in the game part of it. But we felt that while eventually we would like to gamify somewhat, Sophia, we didn't want it to be a game to begin with. We did have some focus groups when we first started developing the ideas with kids, and they seemed to like the idea of coloring a great deal. And it's really played out because we had sessions when we went and split the book in 2 halves, and we read it over a couple of hours to 4th graders in a charter school in urban Buffalo. And you can see the attention span of these 4th graders being extremely variable.
Yes.
You could see the ability, even the knowledge. And so some got to the book because they really like to color, But then in the second session, you could see that they were also reading. And so it allows for almost different preferences and different developmental stages, even within a specific age range. You notice some that are more technical and they go right away to the dictionary. So this allows for everybody to do it the way they want it, to have the experience the way they want it. Mm-hmm. I should also say that our illustrator, Isabella Bannerman, who is a native of Buffalo and she's now in New York City, is not only very experienced, but more importantly, she understands teaching and embracing diversity and inclusion principles. And so she not only helped craft the participants, but at times had some ideas as to what part of the book we would make easier to color, what part would be maybe not really intended to color.
Right. And on that note then, clinical research is terribly important for progressing health, and we find so many people don't know about it or are skeptical. And based on what you're telling me, with the different fourth graders and how they were viewing the book, some going to the dictionary in the back, do you find that the book has made a difference? Do you have any direct examples, for example, for how the book has educated a family to consider a study that could be beneficial?
This is a great question. I have distributed the book, given the book, in a couple of trials that I'm doing where obviously the word randomized, placebo, come in. Mm-hmm. And the kids enjoyed it. However, this is sort of our next chapter. The book is very well liked. People spanning from children to adults and also new Americans who learn English as a second language love it. But we, in this new chapter, want to actually have some evaluation that demonstrates that after the book is read, somebody meaning a group of individuals to whom the group is read are more keen in exploring research or joining a program. And then, ultimately, obviously, that measuring some of the education. So this is for those who may not be so involved in clinical research, is an avenue that needs to be entertained very carefully to respect the rights of people. And so we had to go through the institutional review board to have some simple questionnaires that are now approved, and we will be able to have more qualitative and quantitative indicators. However, over the past 2 years, mm-hmm. we have actually kept count of the number of copies that we've distributed, and it's almost 1,100 copies at different community events, school events, and these have included also copies in the Spanish and Arabic version. We are also now using the book in a elective that a colleague of ours, Dr. Pesar, is doing at the Jacobs School of Medicine for first-year medical school called Health in the Neighborhood. And we know that people are interested. We've had, to date, from September 2019 to today, 235 page views of the website on Sophia on the UBCTSI.
Which, by the way, I have to say, I took a look before I got to talk with you today of the book itself, and it's charming, it's cute, it's well done, it's descriptive, and the artwork's great. For those who haven't seen this yet, and we'll link to it at the end of this podcast, it's well done and it's really cute.
Yeah, and also we have shared the book with new Americans who speak Spanish or Arabic as their mm-hmm. first language, and they enjoyed the book too. As everybody should know, many new Americans had to leave because of circumstances. Right. But they're extremely well educated. So some of them were in the field even of research, and some of them had never heard about research. But it gave them a level of satisfaction to be able to have the book also in their native language.
Yes.
And, talking about really diversity, inclusion, we were very anxious. So we did to translate the book, and we are, very grateful to partner with the International Institute of Buffalo, where they helped us translate the book. And we're also, again, grateful to our illustrator, Isabella Bannerman, because, little things like putting in the Arabic version, the hijab on one of the teacher assistants. We try to...
Culturally sensitive, right?
Yeah, it's important to keep in mind that we have a lot of stereotypes, and we also love the idea of research rangers, because and we are trying actually to do more interactive versions now, because we would like the child to be a research ranger and to identify. You need to think that person can be me. If I like to have my ear pierced, maybe there is piercing. If I want to be having curly hair, I should have curly hair. So, that obviously in a paper book is not possible, but we are thinking ahead on how to make that, more interactive. We're partial way developing an interactive version that could be used on computers and iPads.
Oh, you read my mind.
We are thinking of all different ways to disseminate the book.
So it sounds like your reception has been positive. Do you know yet how many people have read your book? You mentioned the several hundred views for the direct link. Do you have any data currently on this?
Well, the over 1,000 copies have been distributed.
Yes.
At different community and school events.
Which is great.
And often followed up by requests, for more books. So whether it's for coloring or whether it's for reading, the books have been in the household of over 1,000 people. How much they have read of it and how much the book has influenced children and parents, we don't know exactly.
Hard to quantify, right?
I can tell you that at a really wonderful event that made my heart feel good this summer at Canalside, we had many children, and our book was not being read, but we had purchased very inexpensive capes, plastic capes, and in all different colors for the research rangers. And so the kids would come up and they would answer a question about research and then get the book and get the cape. And I wish we would take an entire video because they just loved it. And then I saw that they were sitting down sometimes with teachers who came or their parents and looking at the book. It's also about building trust that you are not going to be a guinea pig and that the research that is being done is for improving the health of our community, which is the overall vision and mission of our CTSI at the University of Buffalo.
Right. And on that note, then, what else would you like to do with the book or any other tools to help evangelize the importance of clinical research?
Well, I think it's most important to try to get more formal evaluations. So when we went to read the book at the charter school that I mentioned before, we had wonderful informal feedback afterwards. If I were a Facebook person, I would post it because the kids were so enthusiastic. But we want to do is more like a formal evaluation. I think the interactive version is important that we continue to work on. And also, so doing a pre and post as we go in schools in our community. Mm-hmm. And again, I have nothing against private schools, and we will certainly do that as well. But I do want to connect with that segment of the population who will not be as easily exposed to, new knowledge, new possibilities, but also instill in them the fact that they can become research rangers. They can be nurses, doctors, study participants. They can be anything they want to.
Right.
So then what we're also doing is exploring avenues to disseminate the book. So these could be actual places where there's a high number of children who are present in these places, and also working, for example, with the community health workers of Buffalo, because they go into homes and they can help, again, spread the message of the importance of clinical research as a tool to better your own health.
Right. So what then have you learned about your own position as a clinical investigator after publishing this book?
I was really listening to what the kids have to say. And although I try to be clear and speak in very easy and understandable terms to my patients and possible study participants, I humbly have to say that once again, we physicians, we clinical researchers are thinking that we are clear, but we may not necessarily be, even with the experience of 30 plus years. And I have learned more about building trust. So perhaps, yes, knowledge is important, but trust is more important.
I agree.
And the classic teaching, and that you educate somebody and therefore they are more likely to be effective in the care even of their disease, is partially true, but not totally true.
So what direction then do you see clinical trials patient engagement going towards?
Well, I think that lack of trust comes from a lot of angles, including things that are clearly disgraceful that happened in clinical research in past years, and I want to think they don't happen anymore. But the aspect of personalized medicine really needs to enter into clinical trials, meaning that there has to be more attention not only to the ordinary inclusion and exclusion criteria, but what can be the characteristic of that particular individual from a genetic standpoint, from a timing of diagnosis, and an attention to, age, in terms of creating this trust that makes people say, I am going to take a chance to go into this trial where I have 2 out of 3 chances of receiving the real thing. Because if I get it, maybe it will help me. If I get the placebo, it will help others. And I think it's also very important that really the social justice angle is kept in mind. Many women now are aware that the earliest trial on some health issues that are completely or in an overwhelming way pertinent to women actually were clinical trials in men. People do know that historically individuals with socioeconomic disparities, children with broken homes, they are not a good study participant. And we have to abandon that idea. We have to make sure that people feel their identity, their difficulties from a socioeconomic standpoint and psychosocially are respected, that the barriers between people and clinical research can be decreased and actually gradually abated if that's the perspective we have. So, it's the principal investigator who needs to set the tone for his or her team to embrace changes. And, in general, from a clinical research standpoint, we are talking about clinical trials, but clinical trials often get developed because of investigator-initiated trials and investigator-initiated basic and translational research. So it is important that we all understand, both as we are writing our grant submission and reviewing our grant submission, that we do find a way to balance the scientific rigor with the inclusivity, diversity, making it possible for people to come into a study. If I demand a 3-hour, 4-hour assessments of questionnaires, it's unlikely that study participants who have to worry about what they are going to put on their table for their children tonight will entertain the idea of a study.
Right.
So I feel very passionate about that. And I hope that, the Sophia book, it's a little part of how we want to connect with children and respect children and families.
Yes. And speaking of, I have one last question about your book. You mentioned research rangers throughout this interview. Can you tell our audience a little bit about what a research ranger is?
Yes. So at the end, towards the end of the book, the idea is that the book is about a journey that Sophia is making. She goes to her physician and she has asthma, and she is exposed for the first time to the idea of participating in a trial. And she, of course, doesn't know how to feel, and there's all that iteration in the book. But as the doctor is explaining about the research, towards, I would say, the end of the book, the doctor says, we can give you a copy of a book that can help your friend understand why you're helping us. And at that point, it's when Sophia and her little brother become the research rangers. So they are the ones who help solve problems and are actually trying to improve kids' health all over. And in the book, that's sort of a turning point for Sophia, because Sophia feels empowered. And in the end, it is Sophia's decision to be a research ranger. And in the end, she says, she answers the doctor who is asking again if she would like to participate in the study. And she said, yes, I think I would like to do that. I want to help change the world. And that page is all a coloring page where both Sophia and her little brother came from a door and then gained the information in a way, and then they became the research rangers. They have the cape and they have just, Sophia is a belt and her brother has a pin that says RR. But so we would like the kids to feel, as they consider a study or as they support their peers who may need to be in a study, to feel that like they are also part of the team. And the idea that we're working on in more interactive versions is to give a chance in a more tangible way for the kids to feel they are the research rangers.
Well, I got to tell you, the book is adorable. And anyone in our audience, I can tell you right now, I've looked at it. There's online, there's an English, Arabic, and Spanish versions on the website, and the artwork's great. The book is cute. It's absolutely something I think kids would enjoy looking at and coloring. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Quattrin. We really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Adrian. I appreciate this opportunity that Trial Site is given to me personally and to the University at Buffalo and the Oshai Children's Hospital and the CTSI to spread the voice about the Sophia book.
Well, thank you. Now, for those of you in the audience who want to learn more about this book, it's Sophia Learns About Research, and it's going to be at buffalo.edu. And we'll put a direct link to the Sophia Learns About Research page with the PDFs on the podcast posted page, which our audience should be able to get to from there. And you can also find us on Trial Site News on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And links will be also provided in the description below. So thank you again, Dr. Quattrin, for joining us. We look forward to this being posted.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Thanks for your time. Bye-bye.
No problem. Take care.